constantly had to stop and be like, hey man, like 2 months ago, you couldn't sit in a car for 5 minutes. Like I was truly at the point where like going to the grocery store, it terrified me. Anything that I could do to not get into the car, I was doing. And you can make it easy or you can make it hard, but I'm going to sit here because I know it's safe. Turns out your body listens. You just have to be very, very diligent. Be willing to face the pain. You have to say to yourself, I'm actually no longer afraid of this.
This is Decentralized Radio. I'm Tristan.
And I'm Ryan.
The goal of this podcast is to help educate you on how to live your most optimal life. We will host industry expert guests to shed light on topics that matter.
We are not gurus, rather two individuals who have had to pave their own path to health and vitality, independent of the centralized systems that plague modern society.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Decentralized Radio. Today, we have Michael on the line. Michael, how's it going, man?
Doing awesome. I'm super excited to be chatting with you guys this morning. Doing super good.
So we did have a original podcast, Michael and I, but I fucked up the audio. So this is going to be even better because Ryan's here. So I think this type of conversation is right up Ryan's alley, and I know you're stoked. I know you guys have been chatting without me in your actual lives as well. So I think this will be fun.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited. I think a lot of the topics that you guys covered in the first podcast, even though I wasn't there, I'm kind of glad we're doing this again because this is sort of stuff that I've had to dive into myself. So I think it'll be interesting.
Yeah. So I think last time we just kicked it off kind of, Michael, with your story a little bit. And I guess to introduce it, we're going to talk a lot about, chronic pain and kind of healing from injuries or mindsets that are kind of very pervasive long-term. People can't get out of the rut. And kind of this side of health that really, if it's not addressed, can hold you back, even if you think you're doing everything else right. So I guess maybe, just take us through your story, Michael. It's pretty empowering. And you've had a lot of, obviously, recent breakthroughs in the past year where you kind of realized what was the main culprit of what was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So the story just around my health journey in general, I mean, it's just been my whole family. There's a big part of our family identity that's around athleticism and health. So it's just been part of my life growing up. My dad would wake us, me and my brother and my sister, he'd wake us up in the mornings, like 6 a.m. and we would do like triathlons around the neighborhood. And that would be like swim 10 laps in the pool, run around the block, and then bike around the bigger block. So ever since I was young, it was a very important part of my life to be healthy and really have an identity as who I thought I was as like an athlete. Like I always kind of like grabbed onto that as part of my identity. And played lacrosse in high school, ran cross country. After high school, decided I didn't want to pursue either of those in like the collegiate sense and got into the weight room. I mean, I was doing that stuff in high school too, because I was like $130. Playing varsity and getting absolutely smoked on the lacrosse field. But so got into the weight room, and that ended up being my physical outlet and how I was expressing myself physically and kind of continuing that identity as an athlete as I got a little bit older out of high school. This led into, the decision to become an exercise science major at Arizona State. It's really like, always kind of like knew I didn't really vibe with the corporate world and didn't want a desk job, etc. So that was a really easy segue for me to work in a capacity that felt really aligned with who I was and also help people. And, I wanted to like open a gym and just like had this whole vision for my life that, was just all around health. And that was amazing for me for a really long time. It was kept me on like this really bright path getting out of high school and going to the first couple of years of college until I woke up one morning after a rigorous CrossFit workout with low back pain. And that was when I was about 19 years old. I started dealing with low back pain, and it wasn't like anything crazy, but it was something that I just noticed and I lived with every single day. And over time, I went down this sort of typical path that somebody who deals with back pain goes down. And it ended up leading to a lot of very detrimental times. Well, in some senses detrimental, but obviously learning experiences. But like, for example, went and got an MRI after trying some of the typical physical therapy stretches that didn't work, and had a doctor tell me I had 2 bulged discs, and that I should no longer squat like ever again, And as somebody who, as I previously mentioned, like that was my whole identity, and the life path I had chosen for myself was in this fitness industry. That was like incredibly depressing for me to hear. It was a huge mental drain, and slowly but surely spiraled out of control until at some point a doctor had prescribed me opiate painkillers, and completely fell off the health path for a couple of years. Like, was self-medicating to deal with some of the depression of not being able to work out, or at least this now perceived notion that I had that working out was dangerous for me due to my pain. And so that took me out of things for a few years. And then I ended up actually in the corporate world. Once I got, off of pain pills, I ended up in the corporate world as a way to try and get my life back on track. And that was good for me at the time. I was able to find a routine and find some stability, make some money, etc. Had a nice hierarchy of things to work towards in terms of promotions and whatnot. But took me probably another 3 years in the corporate world before I finally said, like, I've got the resources financially and some of the time where I can try and tackle this back pain that I've been dealing with for, at this point, it was like 8 years. And always approach that from a physical lens. This is very common. So you have pain in your body or something that's wrong with your body. There must be something that needs to be fixed, right? And I approached it from that lens for a couple of years until I finally was able to come to the realization that my pain was actually not because there was anything wrong with my body. It was actually because of unprocessed trauma, suppressed and repressed emotions, and a dysregulated nervous system. And I used some of the knowledge that I gained from diving into that rabbit hole to heal my back. And it was such an incredible journey of healing and understanding about myself and about my past, and about how we as humans, we are broken down to this sort of dualistic, like, okay, the body, the mind, the emotions, the spirit, like these are all separate entities. And through my own journey, I came to this wonderful understanding that it's actually all just one. It's all part of the same organism, and no one of those systems, which I even hate using that terminology, but no one of those systems is affected without also affecting the others. And that's kind of where I'm at today is through my own experience of healing, helping others to heal their own chronic pain holistically.
Yeah, man. I mean, all that stuff's super powerful. And it's kind of funny because I'll talk to either clients about this or even my own self-realization of the mindset stuff, or just state of mind, state of nervous system things. The mental side of stuff seems to be like the very last thing anyone really ever wants to tackle. And I noticed this sort of pattern when I first started developing autoimmune symptoms almost 4 years ago now, that everyone I met along the way that was dealing with similar symptoms or maybe a different autoimmune disease or had a lot of chronic pain or whatever, they have these extremely traumatic pasts. Like it's very, like 99% of them have like some sort of trauma that has mentally bothered them long before any physical manifestation came about. And I've seen this pattern in people. with mental health disorders too. They seem to be like kind of coupled, but it's just a super fascinating deep dive because it's not discussed a ton. There's more discussion now than there used to be, but I've noticed that even in physical therapy myself for my own back stuff, I had a really good PT, luckily, who brought this up to me. But he mentioned to me, he was like, man, you seem to have like a lot of neural tension going on in like your legs and stuff. And he couldn't ever seem to really figure out anything physically wrong with my back. I, like you, pursued MRIs, like all this stuff. I had very minimal like actual physical issues, but I had this immense like pain going on where like some days it'd be like, can't really do anything. And that actually made it worse too, like not do anything. But he was like, maybe you need to look into some mental stuff. Like he was mentioning like, I think it was like, he was mentioning like doing like ketamine and like a bunch of crazy stuff. But that was like the first time I ever like had anyone tell me that, where my neural tension could be linked to some of my past trauma and my stress response. And it got me thinking about my own autoimmune stuff and how initially what actually brought a lot of my autoimmune symptoms down was me reading this book called Calm the Fuck Down. And it was basically just like a mental, like thinking logically, not, or thinking more rationally, not illogically about like jumping to the nth degree in mental situations. And that's when the worst of my symptoms actually went away, was that when I actually just physically calmed down. And so people don't really think about this. And so for you, I know you talk a lot about breath work and you practice a lot of breath work and you do breath work sessions and stuff. How has that been incorporated into retraining your nervous system? We've talked to Erwin LaCroix on here about LaCroix. That'd be interesting. LaCroix about breath work. And I've really wanted to dive into it myself because I found it to be a very powerful tool for practicing parasympathetic flow and stuff. So tell us about what you've done for yourself and also working with people as far as breathwork goes and helping retrain your nervous system.
Absolutely. So the first thing I'll say on that front is you had mentioned how many people who go through some of these, especially autoimmune issues, there's a pretty well documented relationship between stress and autoimmune issues. And it's not something that's talked about by a lot of doctors, but for a lot of serious conditions, back pain, sure, but like IBS, multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, a lot of these conditions that Western medicine doesn't really have an answer for can be very easily linked to stress. And like you said, sort of like some personality traits that where people are repressing emotions and really not expressing and not able to say no. Oftentimes the personality traits are like they're people pleasers. They put other people before themselves, et cetera, et cetera. I know that for my personal experience, once I got into the understanding that there was an emotional connection between my back pain and some of my past and some of my repressed emotions, I really did a deep dive into looking at what was going on in my life at the time when my back started to hurt. And there was a very obvious traumatic experience that happened involving psychedelics where me and some friends looking just for like a normal fun, like Friday night, whatever. We bought a psychedelic. We thought it was LSD. It was not. To this day, I have no idea what it was. And we had a very horrifying experience that night, to say the least. I mean, it's probably to this day the worst night of my life. And I think that some of the people who were involved would say the same thing. For several months after that happened, I was having flashbacks and stuck in thought loops where I wasn't really in control of my mental state, and I was holding onto a lot of fear, guilt, and shame. And I was not talking to anybody about it. And eventually, no surprise to me, after about 3 or 4 months, my back started hurting. And to me, now that I look back on it, it's so obvious that I was in such a state of mental mania that the only way that my body saw as the only solution my body saw as like a way out of this severe mental turmoil I was dealing with was to create some sort of physical symptom to either distract me or just to literally push those emotions down into my subconscious and into my body so that I wouldn't have to deal with that, because I was at the point of like my psyche was about to fucking split. So once I had that realization, I started to bring some of that stuff back up, and holy crap, did it come back up. I use breathwork specifically because, Ryan, you mentioned that there's a technique called somatic breathwork, and that's going to be very, very different than what Erwan does. Somatic breathwork is specifically related to just creating a space to allow your body to do what it knows how to do. So your body doesn't necessarily want to hold on to this stuff, but many of us have been conditioned to suppress it because maybe it's from our childhood. You know, when you throw a temper tantrum, when you're 2 years old and your parents put you in timeout or they yell at you or whatever it is, that temper tantrum is actually you like somatically expressing and moving stressful energy and emotional energy out of your body. But when you're put into a timeout, all of a sudden now you've been conditioned that by expressing these emotions, you are actually putting yourself at risk to lose the love of your parents and the security of your parents. And when you're that age, that's all you have, right? So it's very, very deep conditioning. And the breath work was just a way for me to create a situation where you do use the breath to create sort of an altered state of consciousness. And of course, like ramp up your physiology and induce a sort of sympathetic state for your nervous system. And then sometimes that can lead to a release, an emotional release. That can look like tears. It can look like screaming, anger, rage. It can look like laughing, joy. It can look like shaking your body, a number of different things. But I was able to, through a number of my own somatic breathwork sessions, and then also just using things like meditation, I was able to give myself permission to let a lot of those emotions come out. And once they started to come out, no surprise, the pain started to slowly melt away.
Yeah, it seems like it's all kind of about energy flow in the body, and whether there's a blockage from, you know, an emotional state, like a actual physiological, biological state, it's kind of all about having and optimizing energy flow so that it can be released and you can have proper function. So I think also something we did together was Qigong, something my mom like does every day. And that's also a powerful way. And Qi is like this, you know, synonymous word for just like energy. And, you know, people have tied that to DC electric current in the body. I mean, it's just like electron flow, whatever you want to call it. You can, I think this is really cool because everything that, you know, I'm researching on the, I guess, quantum biology side of things, it ties it to a specific thing. But at the end, it's like Eastern medicine and traditional practices have been big on energy flow, you know, acupuncture and treatments that have gone back thousands of years have, and yeah, somatic breath work, you know, breath work in general, people just like being able to fully express that, like screaming in the woods or something, you know. I think these are all, they're all rhymes. Like they all go together in different ways and for different treatments. But is there any, I guess, caution if someone's like not ready for something like this, or is that something that can be really helpful for anyone, I guess, from the start? Because I know Ryan was saying like pre-podcast, like about cold is maybe something you probably shouldn't do if your body's not ready for it. Is that similar here, or can you kind of just really benefit if you have some of that trapped energy, no matter where you're at in your healing journey?
It's an interesting question, and I think it's going to vary. This is like a politically correct answer. It's going to vary from individual to individual, right? Like you can run the risk of re-traumatizing yourself. And just like really quickly, just to talk about trauma for a sec, there's this word gets thrown around a lot, like, oh my gosh, like I was traumatized. And we have all experienced trauma to some degree, right? And there are varying degrees of trauma. But I want to be like super clear about my definition of trauma. And I actually have borrowed this from Gabor Mate, who's a doctor who deals with a lot of what we're talking about today. His definition of trauma is it's not necessarily what happened to you. It's what happened. What happens in your body as a result of what happened to you. Okay. So trauma is just a stress response. And we all go through that. Like, you could be a baby crying in your crib and nobody comes to pick you up, and you may become traumatized. You may have a stress response rather, but to become traumatized is what happens when that energy is not allowed to move through you fully. Okay. Tristan, to answer your question, I think in cases of really extreme traumatic experiences, we're talking like physical or sexual abuse, war and PTSD and things like that, it is highly, highly recommended that when you're going through this stuff, you do so with somebody who is trained in dealing with these kinds of problems. Like, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that somebody who's been through really extreme cases of traumatic experiences just like goes and dives into a breathwork session on their own. In fact, I don't even do that, and I'm certified in the breathwork. So that's the first thing I would say. They also talk a lot about this when it comes to talk therapy, and that when you go through talk therapy, in a lot of instances, especially if you're talking about these really highly emotionally charged states from your past, you can actually re-traumatize your nervous system, and it can elicit a fight or flight reaction. And that is something that we absolutely want to avoid. So for just about anyone, I would recommend, at least at the start of your journey, finding somebody who you trust and who you can feel safe with to work through some of this stuff with. Now, if it's not, the like super intense, like some of those really intense traumatic experiences we talked about, then I think that beginning the journey maybe with some journaling or, some writing about your past or writing about things that may have happened to you can have some benefit. But it's just something that you want to be careful about, because you never want to make the problem worse because you dove into it too quickly.
Hey, friend. Thanks for listening. If you really enjoy this podcast, it would be really appreciated if you left us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or subscribe to our content on YouTube. This helps us get to a larger reach and a larger audience to spread this wonderful free education.
Yeah, and I just wanted to quickly add a thought, because it's something that I've experienced personally. Is like, because after my traumatic brain injury, concussion recovery, I definitely dealt with a lot of like anxiety, and sometimes I would just be like randomly working out in the gym, like super intense, and then I would feel like I'm going to have a panic attack. But then I'm like, well, nothing's like, I trained my brain to be like, oh, I'm fine. Like, nothing's wrong. I'm fine. This is just like, again, it's in that fight or flight response from the, injury recovery. And I would get along this healing journey and I would make all this progress, but then I would kind of push the limit like a little bit too much, and then it might like come back. So it was, and that's happened maybe once or twice more recently. And it's just, again, it's like, I have to just retrain. It's like a switch that kind of goes off. And I've learned that there are actual receptors in the body, like cell danger response receptors. And that is why like things like cold and other modalities, it's like if you do them too soon, like you might just be, doing more harm than good. So yeah, I think that's important. But then again, it's like you have to know yourself, and like anything, it seems like a progressive overload is extremely important, because you can just get stuck in that sympathetic state then and kind of erase some progress. But it's hard. Like, that's the hardest part about pretty much anything, right? You always want to sprint to the finish line, but recovery is not like that.
Yeah. It's a process of self-discovery. And only you know what that looks like for yourself. And what's so beautiful about what you just described, Tristan, and I've gone through similar things where you like make progress and regress, and it's not healing is not a linear process, but it is actually really beautiful, because what you just described is just your brain and your body trying to protect you. And one thing that I found when I started to realize that like my pain was actually just like my body's defense mechanism against some of the stuff that I was dealing with emotionally, I actually started to thank my brain, and I started to thank my body and say, wow, like, thanks for holding on to that until I was ready to handle it, because there was a time when I was not ready to handle it. So what you're describing is similar. Like, your body starts to, the fight or flight response becomes triggered because your body thinks that you're pushing it too far. And you can also be the one to say like, okay, I hear you. Thank you for being there to support me and keep me safe, but I got this now, and that is like, that's powerful healing. right there, is when you're the one that can sort of use your conscious thoughts to rewire the software of your subconscious and make those progressions.
It's actually funny that Tristan mentioned that, and then you just kind of mentioned that on top, because I found that to be super important, is sort of like that mental rewiring. And it's one of those things where like you can't necessarily do that alone in talk therapy. You have to be sort of on yourself all the time. Because I would have issues with intrusive thoughts that would always go to, and I think that's part of having OCD background and ADHD and stuff like that, which I actually hate the labeling of those things, because then I feel like it sort of becomes an identification, and then that can even interwrap into your issues that may have triggered the worst parts of those aspects of you and make it worse by having like the constant identification with your diagnosis. So I kind of moved away from that and tried to, for me, it's always been about reframing your thought process around a situation. And actually, one of the most profound things I've ever been told in therapy is you need to be okay with where you're at in order to actually make progress. Because I think this is a similar thing between all of us, is that we all have a sort of an obsession with bettering ourselves or being more optimal or achieving the next goal, whether that's physically or professionally or whatever. And I've always been someone that has been obsessed with looking to tomorrow, because today is not good enough. And I see that a lot in the professional space, in the entrepreneurial space. And I think that mindset, while being beneficial to creating drive, can also be detrimental from a mental perspective, because you're never okay with where you're at. And when you're dealing with physical stuff, you no matter what, like if you break your leg, like you can't just go out there the next week and like start squatting again or whatever, even though you really want to. You have to be okay with taking the step back. And that goes, I think, to the mental process as well. Is like, for me, we were sort of talking pre-show about something I've been doing called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And the whole idea with that, from my newbie understanding, is you take past trauma, to an extent, relive it. But during that moment of reliving the trauma, you try to remove the emotional trigger of it, and then kind of put it in a box, so that when that memory is brought back up, or you have something that maybe triggers that memory, the emotional response isn't connected to it. And you're sort of like a fly on the wall versus being the same person reliving that exact experience. And like you were saying, Michael, it can be kind of dangerous, because you want to make sure that you're in a state of mind to which that doesn't just create you reliving the trauma and then maybe re-traumatizing yourself. And this goes to, I think, also not playing that game of like constantly comparing traumas with other people, because I think it's very easy to like not want to get into this stuff because, like Michael's trauma is way worse than mine, so like I shouldn't even be worrying about mine. And then you kind of create this environment where you're putting yourself down the whole time. So it does need to be treated on an individual level. Yeah. But I'd love to hear some of the results you've had working with people, doing some of this stuff with them, because I think it almost sounds like it's too good to be true till you get into it and you've done it for yourself. But like you can see some like amazing results in pretty much all facets of your life.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to touch on, just because you mentioned sort of this natural tendency to want to compare, right? Which is something we all do. But specifically when it comes to trauma, it's subjective. So something that may have been traumatic for you may not have been traumatic for me, and vice versa. So it's funny, like two people could live through the exact same experience and have a completely different outcome in terms of the stress response in their body. So that's something really important to differentiate. So like, don't, for anybody who's listening, but you should never count out your experiences because they're not that bad compared to somebody else in your life. I think that's really, really important to remember. Like your experience or your experiences and any emotional responses that took place as a result of those are very valid. Now, with that said, we also don't want to get into the realm of becoming a victim mindset, victim mentality with whatever those experiences were. We want to be coming from the mindset of we can truly overcome them and actually learn from them, and maybe at some point, maybe even be grateful in a sense that they happened to us because of all the amazing things and lessons that we were able to learn by overcoming. I think you had a question about maybe some results that I had personally or with other people. Yeah. So man, you had talked a little bit about also like always wanting to be pushing, and what we all as humans have that, human nature for that instant gratification. And one thing that kind of stuck with me, as you were talking about that, is sort of this memory. I had dealt with like relatively low to mid-level back pain, like nothing super intense. I had a couple bouts throughout the years where I would be bedridden for a day or two, but that was kind of it. And I was dealing with it was like death by 1,000 paper cuts. So like that traumatic experience that happened when I was 19, plus who knows what from my childhood. But then all of a sudden I had these like modern day stressors more recently toward the end of my back pain journey that had started to accumulate and build up. And all of a sudden, like over the course, like I was to the point where I was essentially almost pain free. And then in like a month or two later, I had the worst sciatic flare up of my entire life. Which I had never dealt with pain even remotely close to this. And it wasn't something that just lasted a couple of days. It lasted for like several months. And I remember thinking at that time, man, if I could just go back to where I was, like if I could just go back to that level of pain that I was at before, I would be so happy. So it's funny how your perspective can shift. And then as I started to get a little bit better slowly but surely, and I started to, the intensity of the pain started to decrease, I found myself losing that mindset and being like, okay, I need to go faster. I need it to happen more quickly. Like, why isn't? And then I constantly had to stop and be like, hey man, like 2 months ago, you couldn't sit in a car for 5 minutes. Like I was truly at the point where like going to the grocery store, it terrified me because I was in so much pain in the car. I was in so much pain when I'd stand up or sit down in the car. It was absolutely like, it was brutal. But I had to like, you have to reel it in sometimes. I don't know, like in terms of just some of like the success, like it wasn't, I don't know that there was any one like, or one instance where I was like, oh, there it was, it was a constant daily thing. So, I was going to see a therapist because I had started having some of these like emotional somatic releases, essentially, where the emotions were coming out of me either during breathwork and meditation. They were really intense. And specifically the first time that it happened where it was really bad was like right around the beginning of this intense sciatic flare up that I described. I actually had one of these thought loops come back from when I was 19. Like I hadn't had one of these in like 10 years. And this thought loop came back around the psychedelic experience. And I was like starting to freak out, but it was because I had brought these memories to the forefront of my consciousness. So now it was in a sense where like my brain was like, okay, maybe we can actually process this and let it out. And what happened was I wasn't even like meditating or doing breath work or anything. I was watering my girlfriend's plants because she was out of town. And this thing came back and, it started to freak me out a little bit, but then all of a sudden I started to feel, like energy, like pulse, like welling up in my torso. And I started to dry heave. I started to like retch, like I won't do it because it's gross, but you know what dry heaving looks like. And I was literally brought to my hands and knees and I was dry heaving for probably like a minute and a half. And then the thought loop went away. And that was a really, really powerful experience that I had. And I think the first one where I was like, that was truly a successful emotional release, if you can even ascribe that sort of terminology to it. But it was like, because then what happened after that is I had that dry heaving episode. I was like, okay, I need to process what the hell just happened because nothing like that had ever happened to me before. And I started meditating, and I laid down on the floor, and like, boom, like tears just flowing, and it was so interesting because it was just coming out of my body. It wasn't even like I was sad. It was like my body just needed to let this stuff out. So it was interesting. I was watching what was happening to my body from a third person's point of view. And that was really, I would say, the beginning of like the true emotional healing journey for me. And I had a number of other experiences like that. Some more intense, many that were not quite as intense. And again, I used all sorts of different things to elicit those responses from my body. But breathwork and meditation seem to be the two biggest ones. Although Tristan mentioned Qigong earlier, and weirdly enough, there's one Qigong move. It's called knocking on the door of life, and you twist your spine back and forth and back and forth. And for a while, that one would very consistently elicit a dry heaving response for me. Why? I have no clue, man. But when I started seeing this therapist after the first one happened, and I told him about that experience, and we were just doing a phone call, and he was like, "You can't see right now, but I've got a big smile on my face." He's like, "That means like you're doing the right thing." And it was just interesting because like I didn't even do anything. My body I just started bringing some of this stuff up to the forefront of my consciousness, and my body just did the rest. And yeah, so I know that was kind of a long-winded, sort of all over the place answer, but really that was the beginning of a string of many successes around getting some of this stuff out of my body.
Yeah, I think it's what you said earlier, talking about you're going to the grocery store and like you don't even feel like you can go because you're in so much pain. And I've been there so many times with my brain injury and then also like physical injuries. You just like limiting yourself. Like I've had so many like tendonitis, tendinopathy issues, elbows, shoulders, knees. And it's like if you write yourself off already, like before you even do the activity you want to do, you're going to be in pain. Like you're already bringing that to the forefront of your attention and you're already shutting it down as like a possibility. So it's so hard. It's like the hardest thing, but it's almost like you have to kind of be disillusioned to what's going on and just like convince yourself like that power of really just like convincing yourself that you can do these things will supersede it when it's a chronic state. Obviously, if you have a broken arm, like don't try and go like bench or something. But I was talking about chronic pain here, like the pesky injuries that just like linger for years and it's crazy.
It's the self-talk that comes with a lot of those chronic and nagging injuries is so pervasive because I would find myself saying things like, no, I can't do that. I've got a bad back or then my back is kind of fucked up. Like I don't do that anymore. And I would literally, you're surrendering to it. Those limiting beliefs are you saying, no, you win. And Tristan, something you said is like, you have to sort of become disillusioned and like separate yourself from it. The way I actually healed myself specifically around the sitting, because there was probably about a 2-month stretch where I could not sit comfortably. And not only was it like not comfortably, it was like I was almost brought to tears. I was in so much pain every single time. And for the first little while, I was like, okay, I'm just going to lay in bed and not do anything. I'll Postmate groceries if I need something. Like literally, I was just anything that I could do to not get into the car, I was doing. And what I had to do was literally get into the car because I was seeing this lady for it's called EFT. It's like an emotional freedom technique. And she was like 40 minutes away. But I knew something in me was like, I really wanted to see her, but I was like so terrified of these 40-minute car rides. So I would get in the car and I would put on, 432 or 528, like binaural beat, healing frequency type stuff or meditation music. And I would literally drive the entire way and I would talk to myself, sometimes in my head, sometimes out loud. And I would say, I actually know that sitting is completely safe. Like I don't need to be afraid of sitting. I am not afraid of sitting. So to my body, I'm going to sit in this fucking car for the next 40 minutes and you can make it easy or you can make it hard, but I'm going to sit here because I know it's safe. And I would talk to myself like that, and I would find 100 different ways to phrase that exact thing, which is just sending a message that this is actually a safe activity for me. And I would do that every single time I got in the car. And then about 2 weeks later, I was able to sit in the car pain-free. And I didn't do anything else. At this point, I was not doing any stretching. I was not doing any yoga. I've done all that. I did every physical modality to heal my back under the sun. Like, I tried it all. I would go to energy healers and acupuncturists and masseuses. It all came down to me making the decision that this is how I wasn't going to let this dictate what I could and could not do. And then sending messages of safety to my brain and to my body. And then turns out your body listens. You just have to be very, very diligent. And like you said, you have to not give in. You have to be able to, it's like crazy. You have to actually be willing to face the pain. You have to say to yourself, I'm actually no longer afraid of this. Even though it hurts so badly, I was like, I don't care anymore. I'm done. I am done.
Yeah, and it's like those physical modalities of rehabilitation. It's almost like, if you think about it, why they're effective or why they could be effective is because you're actually just, you're giving your body confidence that it can do things. That's like, at the end of the day, like, lower back is such like a prime example. And I've been in this space too, where, because I have a standing desk, and it's like, I know if I drive for 5 hours, like my lower back's just going to get tight and stuff. And I used to have to drive with like a pillow or a cushion or something. But now I'm just like, I don't really need that. Like, I'll be okay if I don't have that. I might be a little stiff or something, but it's like, it's not a big deal. Before, it'd be like, oh, if I don't have that, it's going to be like, it's excruciating pain.
Right.
And it's like, it's because you get into the car and you're already thinking, oh, like, I don't have this support system. Like, this is bad for my back, or sitting is the new cigarettes. Like, no, it's fucking not. It's the new cigarettes is everything else that's toxic in our environment. Or if you literally just don't get up all day, like if you sit for a bit, you're going to be fine. But it's that conditioning that you're receiving externally and you don't even realize it. And then you're just putting more and more attention to that. But again, it's really challenging, right? Because Ryan was talking about physical therapists, and apparently he had one that was kind of open to that. I went to one as well for my chronic knee tendinopathy. And they had signs everywhere saying like, some people have slip discs and they'd never reported a pain symptom in their life. There's people who have chronic back pain, have nothing physically wrong with them. Same thing with knee injuries. People with torn meniscuses are just like walking around, like having a great time, no problem. And then people with no physical knee damage are like, oh, my knees are just screwed. Like, what's going on? So my question is basically, it's like, how do we address this better, from a systematic standpoint? Because it's really tricky. And you talk to a lot of these like healers or mental, health coaches or whatever you want to call it. I mean, cranial sacral therapy. Like, I've done something like that, like remote, and it's, it just sounds like a scam. It's very, and if you believe it's a scam, it's not going to work. Yeah. So it's this touchy subject where there is a lot of effective treatment out there, but it's all like self-belief and, reaffirming personally. And it's a lot of personal work. So how does this get better addressed, like from a collective standpoint? Because this is one of the biggest issues probably in society from a healing perspective.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest changes that I had to make, and this actually goes not just around my back, but around all of the sort of holistic health protocols that are out there. Like you said, like once you start to become aware of the toxic environments that we all live in. And I know you guys talk a lot about EMFs and artificial light and all that stuff. But there's a very, very important differentiator between awareness and anxiety. So you can be aware that sitting is not that good for your body, but you can also not be anxious every time you sit. And that's one of the most important things you can do, because if you are getting into the car, like you were describing, Tristan, or like for me, it was like, oh my God, like here we go again. Like this is going to be so horrible. God, I fucking hate sitting. And that's how you're talking to yourself and thinking about it. it's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's probably not going to be a very fun experience for you, versus changing your mindset to like, oh yeah, like I'm going to have to do this 6-hour car ride. I do everything else right. You know, I go to the gym, I do stretches, I got to work out. So I know my body's really strong. And, you know, if there is a little bit of tension, then that's okay. Like I'll just go back in the gym and I'll stretch it out, and I'll give my body the TLC that it's asking for. Cause that's really all that is. Like your body is just saying like, hey, like I don't love this position. So, you know, whenever we get a chance, if we can just, attend to some of the tightness back here, that would be awesome. Cause I don't really love sitting that long. So like there's a really, really important difference between awareness around something and anxiety. And I actually truly believe, when it comes to any of this stuff, like, you know, you're eating your seed oils, or you're looking at your phone, blue light after dark, or whatever it is. Obviously, you should try and avoid those things when you can. But if every time that you aren't avoiding them, you're also stressing the heck out about the fact that you aren't avoiding them, the stress that you're feeling is actually worse for you than the non-optimal thing that you're doing. The one other thing I wanted to say around some of the different healing modalities, because there's so many that are out there, and just something that came through for me as you were saying that, Tristan, is that really, truly the healing modality that's the most effective is the one that you believe in.
Yeah. I mean, and the one that you're going to adhere to, like that you think it's like a diet, right? Like
Yep.
if it's not sustainable for you, you don't have belief in it. You don't think it's going to work. You think it's just like a short time period thing. Yeah, it's not going to, like, you have to be fully committed. So, I mean, that's why I always say it's like, you're not going to get better. You're not going to be the most optimal version of yourself, live, you know, the best life that you could until you get your mind in the right place. Because until you get that sorted out, like, it doesn't matter what you do, because you're not going to stick to it, or you're not going to be fully convinced that this is the right thing for you. So it's always the cliche, like, mindset, like, is the best, you know, biggest, most important thing. And there's all these motivational stands out there, but at the end of the day, it is, and it's fucking hard. And you got to look yourself in the mirror and be honest. Like you're saying, Ryan, earlier, you got to be kind of like motivated, but realistic with yourself on what you want to achieve, what you can achieve, but not like, oh, I'm going to be better like tomorrow. And if I'm not, I'm going to be depressed. But you also have to be the opposite. You have to be like, well, I can get better, but it's going to take work and it's going to take time. And that's how it goes. You can't cheat these things. You can't not put in the work and expect to get better. But you have to do it yourself, because it's your mind. It's your head. Nobody knows what's going on in your mind besides yourself. So there's no hand holding going on here. And that's why these practitioners and things like that, it can be a bit, you know, weird. I would say.
One quick thing just on that note, because this is truly one of the most important things for my personal healing journey, is I was going through this constant cycle of hope and despair where I would, I'll just give you like the general timeline. It was like, okay, my back hurts. The doctor says I'll go get epidural injections. Hopeful. Epidural injections don't work. Despair. Let me try physical therapy. Hope. Physical therapy doesn't work. Despair. Okay, I found this new masseuse who says they can help me. On and on, acupuncture, on and on. And I was just going, and all I was doing, I was outsourcing my healing to somebody else. And for some people, this can be really scary, what I'm about to say, but like it can also be very empowering. You are the healer. Okay. It's not the masseuse. It's not the physical therapist. It's not the energy healer. It's not the craniosacral therapy person. It is you. Okay. So if that freaks you out, it's because you have to be willing to face that nobody can do this for you. That doesn't mean you have to do it alone, but you have to be the one who steps up and does this. And for me, once I realized that, it was actually super empowering, because I was like, okay, first of all, I don't have to go spend any more money on these people, because over the years I had spent probably 25 plus grand just on various healing modalities. But it was like, wow, so I can really just change the way I think, change my relationship with my body, obviously keep continuing to do the right inputs in terms of exercise and food and all of that good stuff. But like, I can actually just do this on my own. I don't need anybody else. And turns out once I came to that realization and came to that understanding, I finally, for the first time in my entire experience, started to get actual lasting relief. Versus like that hope and despair. And like sometimes you would get a little bit of relief, but to me, honestly, like a lot of that stuff was placebo anyway, because I was feeling hopeful and I would come out of some of those treatments and I'd be like, okay, like, maybe this is going to work. And then the pain would come back. And then I was like, dang it, here we go again.
Are you interested in 100% grass-fed, grass-finished bison meat? I'm excited to be a partner with Falls Family Ranches. Based in Wyoming, Falls Family Ranches is raising high-quality bison meat the way nature intended. As a native large ruminant of North America, bison is one of the most nutrient-dense foods you can consume. If you're interested in trying out their bison boxes, use code Tristan, Tristan, 10 for 10% off your first order.
It's really funny you mentioned that. And that's something I was going to say too, is like that, the idea of outsourcing your issues. I feel like that's just such a common thing amongst like everybody that has any sort of like health problem at all. I mean, like we go to the doctor to get medication to fix our problem or mask our problem or whatever. It's how I view sort of like antidepressant medication. Not that there isn't a place for those things, but I look at all these things as tools to achieve the ultimate goal. And most people kind of just stop at that modality or whatever, whether it's medication or whatever. Or I did the very same thing you did, which probably everyone has done that's listening to this podcast, of that sort of hope despair loop that you get caught in. And I was doing that with my autoimmune disease for like the first 2 years, where I spent like tens of thousands of dollars, like trying to outsource my health to every functional practitioner under the sun that I found on Instagram. And I'd just give them money and be like, cool, tell me what to do. And half the stuff I already knew every time anyways, but you kind of go through this process of like, you work with someone, you don't get the results. So you find this other person, and because it's just a new person, you're like, oh, it's going to be all brand new. And then you find out like, oh man, you probably know like 2/3 of this stuff by now. And then you just kind of go through the motions, but you didn't really implement half of the things that maybe they even suggested. Because you're right, at the end of the day, this goes to all like facets of life, is like pretty much everything is on you, and that's okay. And it shouldn't be looked as, oh, such a burden. You should look at that as an opportunity to create the best version of yourself. Because the greatest things that you do in life often are achieved by you. And like, there's some pride that you can take in that. And it's like, now you can look in the mirror, Michael, and be like, man, I did that. Like, it was me that did it. Sure, I got a lot of information, learned a lot of stuff, but it was me that implemented these things. Because I found this to be true with people that, and this, to have the same condition, but it's like no two people are the same necessarily. And so everybody works a little bit differently. Everyone is a little more receptive to different therapies. And so it's really up to you to sort of troubleshoot that and figure out what works. You can make the suggestions, but they got to do it and figure out if that's actually going to do anything. I don't live in your body. So it's one of those things that sort of frustrates me, but also like I have to meet people with the level they're at and sort of got to play this mind game of sort of tricking them into figuring out that, oh, I actually got to like do this stuff to make it better. And I think everyone would be better served, because no one just goes to therapy and suddenly has perfect mental health. Like, they have to work through the process. Like, it's not like I go into EMDR and like he EMDRs me and then I'm fixed. It's like, no, I have to do the processing. I have to do the hoop jumping and stuff. And I have to be the one to put the trauma in a box and remove the emotional aspect of it.
Right. Well,
and it's super tough.
And a lot of the actual process, the progress that you make through the healing comes after the session. It comes through the integration portion, through the next, whatever, between, I don't know if you do a session a week or a session a month, whatever. Yeah. But that's when really the actual progress is made. And, somebody is there, like, thank God for practitioners. Like, I don't want to write them off, because many of them are really, really important for people to just have a space and have somebody who's listening to them and have somebody who can walk them through a process of letting your body do what it knows how to do, and just being a guide. But there's a difference between somebody who's a guide for your healing versus somebody who calls themselves a healer.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's just an important distinction.
Yeah, I'm sure you found this to be true too. Is like, yeah, like you said, you kind of end up just being a shepherd for people. Like you can instill your wisdom and then they kind of do with it what they will. And it's pretty awesome to see though other people like become empowered and like not need you any longer and all of that stuff. I find that to be the most like, as far as from a selfish point of view, the most like good feeling thing is like seeing other people be like, I don't need you anymore because I figured it out. Like I know I know what to do now. It's so cool. I love seeing that.
And that's when you know that they're actually going to make it. Like they're going to get to where they need to be. Because they've now taken the responsibility completely for themselves.
So how do we help people do that? Like, how do we help people, like be their own healer? Like, how do we get them in that mindset? Like, because it's different for everybody, but like, what's sort of your process with somebody to help them, like, yeah, at the very least, just have confidence in the process.
Yeah.
Because I think one thing too is like, people need to be okay with the idea of they're going to fuck up maybe 10 times before they figure it out. Because I think we go online and we see people's success stories, but that could be years of stuff that they did to now get them posting about it. So how do they, especially, it's hard to get people to be okay with trying stuff that they don't know will work. You know what I mean?
Right. And when somebody's been through that cycle of hope and despair, as we've spoken about, they can become a little bit disillusioned with the fact that like, okay, should I really try this again? Is this another person that's going to, not really, they're just going to take my money and send me some information that I already know, this and that. In terms of how I work with people, the first thing that my coaching program, so right now I'm a chronic pain coach. My goal is to just help people heal chronic pain holistically. So no drugs, no surgery, nothing like that. Using everything we've spoken about today, the power of your mind, the way you talk to yourself, creating space for emotional release. And then a big aspect of this as well for a lot of chronic pain patients is overcoming fear of physical activity. Because for so many of us, we've been conditioned to believe that whatever our injury the trigger or the cause was something that happened in the gym, or, I bent over and picked up this box wrong when I was moving, and then I spazzed out and now my back's hurt ever since. But so the first part of my program is just an educational portion where it's like, I'm just sharing knowledge with you, because once you're equipped with the knowledge, you can just begin to apply it to your own life. And throughout that process, as we do some learning together, there are some assignments, weekly assignments, guided meditations, guided visualizations. There's a really great mindfulness exercise for chronic pain called somatic tracking. And that's just like, rather than having a hyper arousal, it's like instead of watching what's happening in your body like a hawk looking for a rabbit, you're just watching it like watching a cloud in the sky. So does it change? Does it move? Just curious. Like, I'm not afraid. Anyway, and then really diving more into some of the moving and overcoming fear and things like that. But to answer your question, Ryan, it really is just being more of a conduit for the knowledge and the information. And then constantly reminding that person like, hey, I'm actually not doing anything. You've done all the work, and I'm proud of you for that. And that's what's most important, is like, we don't get any credit for any of the work that they're doing. I mean, we just get, you sort of use the word shepherd, which I kind of like, hey, I'm just going to show you the way. But you do all the work, and that's empowerment to me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's kind of the best part too, because, man, I just can't, I mean, I know you felt this too, but it's like, you kind of feel dumb after you spend like tens and tens of thousands of dollars on stuff. And then you realize like, oh, I actually had it within me this whole time. But at the same time, this goes back to this point where I think people, like, I'm actually grateful for the struggles I've had over the last 10 years, because I never would have become the person I am at such a young age without them. And it's sort of like at some point, most people that get through this and come out the other end, they have a much more positive outlook on a lot of stuff in their life and a lot of the struggles they'll face in the future, because you've been through so much stuff, and there's always light at the end of the tunnel. Like always, like I'm sort of, it's funny because like I've always looked at myself as a pessimistic person, but I've become sort of like the polar opposite of that over the last several years, where even though I have moments of like a little bit of negativity going on, at the end of the day, I'm like, yeah, I've been through all this stuff. I can definitely get through this like financial struggle or whatever. And so that's kind of the coolest part, is like you just sort of build this resilience. And that's what all this is about, is like building resilience both in your mind and in your body, and learning that you are a freaking machine, and that if you want to go climb that mountain, you probably can. Just not if you break your leg right away. But
Peter Levine, who's an author that I've done some reading of, he talks a lot about trauma. And in his words, trauma is hell, but trauma healed is a gift from God. So whatever it is that you're going through, whether, autoimmune issues, chronic pain, TBI, we've just look at the small group. We have like this whole plethora of different experiences, but ultimately all of those things are just an invitation for a transformation. Right. And you get to decide if you're going to show up and RSVP and show up. Right. But like, that's really what it's all about. And then once you make the transformation, like you said, like it's hard for anything to bring you down at that point, because you've already been so much and you already know what you're capable of. And all of a sudden you're able to face a lot of life's obstacles with a lot more optimism and positivity and less self-doubt, and more confidence.
And last thing I'll say, and I'll let Tristan jump in here, but I think what you said earlier is really important about about sometimes stressing about something that may be negative, like have a negative impact, can be worse than the actual stimulus. And I think about that a lot, because like we're surrounded by so much crap, but sometimes worrying about like the EMF or the blue light or the whatever can make the effect actually worse. That doesn't mean like don't ignore it, but it's sort of this, and I use this analogy a lot, or this simile or whatever it's called, metaphor. It's not really a metaphor, but analogy of my brother, for instance, does nothing that I do. He does like some things, like he's what would be called like stereotypical bro science healthy. But he's never dealt with any of the things he's never had an autoimmune disease. He's had a lot of the same stimuluses as me, and even worse, like plays video games a lot, but he's still jacked and all this stuff. Maybe it'll catch up to him one day or whatever. But I think what keeps him like in the state of healthy is that he is much more laid back than I was throughout a lot of those years that I was stressing out about stuff and just putting myself down. He's someone that's always been endlessly optimistic and happy-go-lucky. And that does go a long, long ways. That's why we can have people that smoke and drink and don't take care of themselves and die at 103, because they have this other aspect of health that maybe somebody that was so neurotic about eating the right stuff and all this stuff doesn't have, because that neuroticism does come with a negative side effect. And so there's a balance to these things that I think is important. But it's like some of those anomalies where people do all the wrong things but seem to live forever. I think there is like this huge aspect to being in the right mindset for the duration of your life that is just like so powerful.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think you have to be careful with those, because those people are 100 now, so they were raised 100 years ago, Ryan. But I do agree with what you're saying. It is the neuroticism's real, and that's for sure. We've talked about that a lot with like the Oura Ring, and I mean, actually, then you're just adding. You're trying to quantify everything. You're trying to like pinpoint things. You're trying to compare it to other people. Yeah, it's definitely not the way to go about living your life. It's like Michael said, it's important to be aware, but not be anxious. But education is important, because then you can understand that, like if I'm 5 feet away from something, then it's going to be less toxic, or I can buy organic foods and ask people about these things. So it's like empowering. But going back to what this is all about, and this is why it's such a perfect conversation for decentralized radio, because it's personal responsibility. It's individual responsibility that's required to heal. And if you don't think you're capable of that, you're not going to be capable of a lot of things. Like, you need to have that mindset that you can accomplish literally anything. Anything that's in front of you is achievable. And if you live in the past, you dwell in the past, which I pretty much hate to do. And I've had a lot of conversation about this recently. I don't know why, but it's like, I don't even like to go there. Not because it's like, oh, a bad thing in my life, but it's like, I've just moved on so much from that. And I'm proud of it, you know, because when I was in that moment, it was like, wow, if I could just get 10, 20% better, imagine how much better my life would be, because I'm at a 7 out of 10 pain every day. If I could bring that down to like a 5 out of 10, wow, what a difference. And then you get there and you're like, oh, I got here. I could get anywhere. I could go there. I could be at 0. I could be healthier than I ever was in my entire life. It might not be tomorrow, but it'll be in my future, and there's nothing stopping me. And that's the mindset you need to have if you actually want to heal. And then your body's like, fuck yeah, let's do it. And you might get a flare up, and you might get, but you know, you've been there. You know, that's, we had Vance on, we had Noah on talking about concussions. It's like, yeah, well, I'm not afraid of fighting. I'm not afraid of getting another concussion, because if I get one, I've been there. I know how to heal. I'm confident, and I won't have this hyper anxiety around the situation, which is actually something I probably still struggle with. The only thing, and like Ryan said, you can actually elicit an autoimmune response. For example, if you have had brain injuries in the past and someone like smacks you in the head, like a little tap, you could freak out and actually get a headache. Why? Because your body's trying to protect yourself. Your brain's trying to protect itself, like Michael was talking about earlier. Is there anything wrong? No, there's nothing wrong. Like, you can't get a concussion from someone slapping you in the head at like a minor force level, but it's all about how you respond to the situation you're in. And for me, it was hard because at first you don't know that this is possible. So it's awesome that people are sharing their stories. That's why this is important. It's awesome that there's coaches out there. For me, it was a book called The Brain Changes Itself. And I know Michael and I talked about this a lot. And I read this book, and it's the healing stories in there are like incredible, like from paralyzed people just visualizing pain away, being able to walk again. And that really changed my whole mindset. So I'm curious, Michael, like, what are the best resources for people who maybe are struggling, or, you know, things that you found really helpful to motivate yourself, or just in general, maybe that we haven't covered, kind of helpful resources?
Yeah, I actually I've compiled a list of free resources for people who are dealing with chronic pain. So if anybody is listening and wants access to that, or wants to pass it along to a loved one or a friend, please shoot me a DM on Twitter or Instagram at Michael Ammons, and I will give you that list. It contains a lot of the resources that I use through my own healing journey. If you're in chronic pain specifically, or you think you might be dealing with repressed emotions, the number one book that I would recommend is The Mind Body Prescription by Dr. John Sarno. He talks about back and neck pain primarily, but also a number of other chronic issues that Western medicine hasn't been able to identify root causes for. And he has hypothesized for many, many years that they are related to repressed emotions, and specifically repressed anger oftentimes. There's also a wonderful book called When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate. That's another really amazing one. And Tristan, I actually, from your recommendation, read The Brain That Changes Itself. And that was an incredible, inspirational story as well. And I think one of the last things I'll say is, like, watch success stories. Like, that's why I think that book is so powerful, Tristan, because it's like, you're like, wow, somebody that was paralyzed, had a stroke on their left side of their body. The one woman who like had the wobbly, I forget what it's called, vestibular or something. Mm-hmm. Like you're kind of like, we talked about how you compare yourself to people who have like worse traumatic experiences, but how about comparing yourself to somebody who had a worse physical chronic condition who was able to heal? whoa, like that's pretty powerful. Because then you're like, holy shit, well, if they could do it, then, what's possible for me? So that was another thing I did, is I would look up chronic pain success stories on YouTube when I was feeling down, and I would just watch those, and it made me feel so much better. And you get a lot of really great perspectives from people who have gone through the journey as well. So,
yeah. And it's like, that's why do you think David Goggins is like so popular? Because he came from such a terrible situation and he just dug deep. And it's like, you don't need to be David Goggins. You need to be you. You need to be Michael Ammons. You need to be Ryan Brown. You need to be Tristan Scott. What are you going to achieve after you heal? You don't need to run an ultra marathon. But that is the takeaway from this message, is that anybody can heal and they can become better if they just callous their mind.
Amen.
Who's going to carry the boats?
Awesome.
It's just so important, I think. And it's really like, it's just, mental health has never been worse, right? And we're turning to so many pharmaceuticals. It's like everyone just wants the easy way out. And the, system is conditioning that this is the solution. It's not the solution. The solution lies within you. And anyone who's selling you that story otherwise is wrong, and they're just trying to profit off of you. And that goes with anything, supplements, everything. Yep. These are all tools, maybe, and there are moments in time where these compounds can be helpful, but they're all should be treated as a temporary measure. And if you want the long-term solution, you got to look yourself in the mirror real hard, because it's not easy, but anybody can do it. Us three, we've done it. And we're still progressing. We're still on this journey. And that's a testimony. And we're not special. So I just want to highlight that there.
No, that's actually a really good point. Just like the last thing I'll say is like the people think they're the exception. I'm the one that can't get better because of X. And that's just not true. So I actually really liked what Michael was saying about watching success stories of people that have like overcome worse than you. Because there's a lot worse. Like I've seen I always tell people this to anyone that reaches out to me, is like, I'll like show them somebody else that I know personally that has crazy stuff. Like that they were like, I have friends that were told they would die. My boss was told he would die from terminal cancer. And he's still here like 4 years later with no cancer now. And so it's like, there's crazy stuff. And so I think people put themselves in the box of like, oh, I'm the one that's not going to get the results. And that immediately sets you up for failure by giving your body the feedback that you're not going to get better. And that's like the first thing you need to change before you do anything, because without it, it doesn't really matter, because you're still feeding yourself the negative feedback.
I think it should be illegal for doctors to say that kind of stuff, by the way.
Dude, it's
absolutely ridiculous.
I've been told some really crazy stuff about my stuff. And my favorite thing is to go back and be like, yeah, I didn't need this anymore. So I just stopped taking it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, Michael, where can people find more information about you? I mean, well, first off, thanks for coming on. I think it's just such an important conversation, right? Like, it's like people don't like talking about this stuff because it's like either it's hard to physically grasp the importance of it unless you're in that situation. It's easy to get in that just be better mindset, just do better. It's not that hard. Like, it is really hard, but it is that personal responsibility. So that's why I think it's a good fit. But it's also hard to talk about this emotional and traumatic side of things, because especially for men. So I think you do a great job bringing that to light. So where can people find more about you and what you're offering and the whole lot?
Yeah. So thank you guys for having me as well. You can find me on Twitter or Instagram are going to be the easiest avenues. I check my DMs every day, multiple times a day. So hit me up over there. Like I said, if you want those free resources, if you have questions, if you want to jump on a consultation, right now my consultations are completely free. They will not be that way forever. So please take advantage of that if you're interested. Even if, like, I had a guy schedule a consultation who wanted to talk about his brother, and I was chatted with him for like over an hour. So I'm so passionate about this that right now I'm happy to just talk with anybody who wants to. So hit me up on socials. My ending message for this is that, like, when it comes to this healing journey that we've all been through, that we're talking about, nobody can do it for you, but you do not have to do it alone. I'm here for you. I love you. And yeah, like there's always going to be support out there for those who seek it. So that's it. That's all I got. Appreciate you guys so much. This is great.
Thanks, man. I think that's such a powerful message. And yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. You have the power within you. Don't forget it. We'll see you next time.